Well, maybe I will just start from a personal history. Yeah, I was born in Malang in 1954 from a Chinese Peranakan family. Peranakan meaning, a mixed Chinese family that has been there for quite a long time and has been culturally assimilated to the local culture. So the city that I was born is in East Java in Malang. So I was born there, and then I spent my childhood in that city. I went to a Catholic school, elementary Catholic school, and then I moved to West Java, to Bandung, and stayed there until I completed my high school, and then moved to Jakarta and went to University of Indonesia in Jakarta to do my bachelor's degree in English. Up to that point, it's just normal growing up process. Of course, there are many occurrences in which, as a minority, I underwent sort of a racial discrimination and experiences, but that was not at that time a major issue in my mind. And then I went to do my master's at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles, and after that I returned home and I started to teach at the university. Then later on I completed my PhD at America again in Cornell in English, and then I went back and continued my teaching. Right up to that point of I think from the point I was born up to that moment when I was teaching full time, there are many issues around me on gender issues of identity, but it did not create a certain crisis to me that it just became a part of my teaching. So I started to have an awareness about issue of identity, issue of gender, of justice, of social equity, and all of these things, and I integrated into my teaching and writing. But I think a critical moment occurred in 1998 when there was this multi-dimensional crisis in Indonesia, and there was a lot of pressure towards the government to change their authoritarian system. So it's a movement against the authoritarian system of the new order that had been there for 32 years. Right, but the critical moment at that time occurred in May 1998, in which there was a riot, and there was this rumor of violence against the Chinese, especially the Chinese women. At that time, the city where I lived in, it was in Jakarta, the capital city. It was in chaotic condition. There was burning, there was riot in several parts of the city. And as a citizen, as an inhabitant of the city, of course, together with all the community, we all felt troubled, we were very afraid, and we saw how the community or the city was affected completely by this crisis. So in the one hand, there is a movement against the government, to demand the authoritarian government to step down. So it's a people's movement, and as a teacher in the university, I also support my students in joining that democratic movement. So, but at the same time, in the community, there was this tension of rioting, and then there's a strong racial element there. Racial and sexist element in which women and of a certain race was targeted to be victims of this violence. So what to do. As a scholar, I used to do my activism in terms of only intellectual kind of level. I wrote at that time I had written about, for example, multicultural issue, about the government policy in, for example, managing diversity, and what is the relationship between minority and majority, racial issue, ethnicity. All of this I had written before in my sort of intellectual profession. But this moment demanded something else. You could not just stay there and write. I mean, when you see people are dying, that students are being killed, so what to do? At that time, I was not yet connected to really grassroots movement or activism in the actual sense. So some women actually did initiate a movement in early 1998. That is the voice of concerned mother, or Suara Ibu Peduli. They went to the street. These intellectuals, our friends, they came down to the street and started a demonstration on the street to demand at that time it was also economic crisis, so prices were increasing. So demanded to the price, so that the price of milk for mothers, to give to their baby, to be, government really started to have to think about the prices of milk and the welfare of the mothers and baby. But that was used as a way to criticize the government economic policy, So that was already in January 1998, and this was May, right? And after the May riot and the rape of the Chinese women, some of my colleagues, women friends, started to make a call for all intellectual activists, anybody, to come together and to do something. And I answered the call. Because it was not possible to stay quiet at that time. I just had to come. So we went together and we met in a forum, and we started to think what to do in this. So we created a group. I actually joined. They created it, and I sort of joined their group to do a number of things. First of all, we call it actually, there was this already existing group called Volunteers for Humanity. They were actually initiated by activists, pro-democracy activists, to help the victims of the riot, and also to collaborate with students and activists at that moment with the pro-democratic movement. They called themselves Volunteers for Humanity. And we actually formed another subdivision called the Violence Against Women kind of group. So a group that the women's, sort of a women's wing of that group, to really handle the issue of the violence against women. Of course, it's not only women's forum. A lot of men also joined that division. So I started with that division, and there was several things that we need to do at that time. First of all, to really be there for the victims. And some of us, who are expert in doing this, or who had experience in counseling, they actually joined the activity. I joined the division that actually did more public advocacy, and so we answered some invitation to come to community gatherings or to schools or to communities all over Jakarta to talk about the violence and to discuss with them, because they were so disrupted by it, they were afraid. At this moment, I realized how my position as an intellectual and all what I learned about culture, cultural theory, critical theories, actually cannot be separated from the actual movement on the ground. You know, we had to connect these two. It cannot be just an abstract, of academic kind of discussion. It has to connect with the society. And that particular moment, I started to be forced to translate all of our theory I have, that complicated, complex theory, into everyday language, to talk with students, to talk high school students, to talk with parents, to talk with religious groups from all over Jakarta. There is this Buddhist group, there's this Chinese community group, there's the Catholic Christian group, there's the Islamic women group, and then to discuss with them what it means to be a citizen, what are these that we are facing, cultural issues of cultural identity, stereotype, racism, violence against women. So I have to translate feminist theories, theories about identity, and talk with them and find ways in which they feel to empower them, to make them feel that I can do something about it, not in a very abstract way, but in our daily life. This is what I can do with my friends, and then, so that is one moment, and that is also the moment in which I met various people from different fields, different expertise, different professions. So I met a lot of artists who were very concerned. They were also, before, they were not politicized, because as you have to understand that for 32 years all professions have been depoliticized by the New Order government. We are not encouraged to really do something, on the, grassroots activism, because of the trauma of 1965, the communist cleansing trauma before. So the government that came out of the communist cleansing in 1965 was a government that tried to very much to stabilize politics by depoliticizing the citizens. Students should stay in the university and study. Artists should stay and do their professions very well, but not mixing arts and politics. So that was the situation. And in 1998, artists started to realize that, well, it doesn't work. I mean, they can't just paint. They have to also, they cannot just paint something beyond politics. Arts and politics. So we met together and we started to create forums of discussion to talk about things that are tabooed, that are censored before. For example, issues of racism, issues of, like before in the New Order government, you're not supposed to talk about this very sensitive issues. For example, to talk about race, to talk about ethnicity, to talk about religion, to talk about class division in such a way that might create controversy. So they have a term, SARA. This abbreviation of race, ethnicity. These are not. You have to talk about them in such a way that it's safe. You should not talk about divisive issue that cause conflict or something. And after 98, then we have forums to talk about issues, but Chinese issues in Indonesia. Because we see in 98 how the Chinese are targeted as a victim of violence. Why did it happen? What was the construction? Why people are so susceptible to this kind of violence? So we started to talk, make a forum. It was quite painful for a lot of people because they have to deal with racism and among themselves, because the Chinese were also, there was racism within the Chinese themselves. There were racism, so, but we created that forum and then people started to talk. Then people started to try to understand each other and why. And they realized that it's a long history of construction. It's from colonial period, from all the stages in history that was discussed. So all the theory, all the thing that we discussed in class, it was there in the forum, and people sort of take position. So that was, I think, most important moment in my history as an intellectual activist, the 1998, right? And after the 1998, that was also the other moment in which I started to meet with you, with all activists from Southeast Asia and from Asia. We started to have inter-Asia kind of movement, right? So there are two levels. First, the local level, and then in the regional level. I think that was the two biggest stepping stone for my activism. From then on, then my work has been in the intersection between textual studies, talking about ideologies of whatever text, film, literature, and also movement and activism. And the two cannot be separated. And then I always try to find the spaces between these two, or which intersect these two, whether it in the arts movement, whether in the student movement, or in women's movement. So that is, I think, what I can say at this moment.
Yes. But then has society somehow opened up, and so people can start talking about these issues now?
Yes and no at the same time. After the 98, we have also, the process of democratization is not linear, definitely, right? It's very complex. With the opening up of the democratic arena, of course, we have more voices to speak up, right? And now the society has become a arena for democratic contestations. So we hear voices from all over the places, right? Pro-democracy voices, progressive voices, as well as conservative voices, voices that was against us, voices that are different, So there's a heterogeneity of voices in society after the transition toward democratization, And there was this is a complex, there are complexities. At the same time, there is society started to be ready to talk about this issue. But on the other hand, the conservative voices are also getting very strong, and they also use the media, the liberal media, to voice their agenda. So, for example, in the political arena, before the 98, this is very centralistic government and centralistic policy. So everything is centralized in Jakarta. After 98 and then 2001 and so on, the government started to reform themselves and started to decentralize their policy. So now we have decentralized government. And it's so much decentralized that the authority is now in the hands of regencies, for example. So in each regency, or not in the level of province, but smaller, they could issue their regulation, they could issue their, and because before it was so centralized, so much, homogenized, now people in the regions, in the provinces, and they started to want to exert their own identity in terms. So there are more plurality in the ground. With plurality and plural decision-making policies, sometimes there are, for example, in terms of gender issue. Before, if we want to do something, we want to do movement, we do it in Jakarta, and it affects all the regions. But now we cannot do things in Jakarta. It will not affect the regencies because each regencies have their own policies, and the conservative forces, the status quo, conservative, right-wing forces, also working in the regency level. So some regencies, for example, issue very conservative legislation that actually is not a progressive legislation, but it's kind of a regressive, kind of a moving backward, and there are a lot of kind of restriction, for example, for women to be active in the public space. So like we see that how patriarchy actually started to flourish in the regions, because they wanted to, for example, revive again the old cultural tradition to get their own identity from their own cultural identity from the central government, and that going back to the older identity sometimes can resurrect the practices of patriarchy, and some regencies, they adopt Sharia law, for example, which restrict women, certain, etc., etc. So there is complexity here, and on the one hand there is openness, democracy, more democracy, progressive movement. On the other hand, there is sort of backlashes everywhere. So the patriarchy works into legislation. Actually, a lot of legislation that is restricting, for example, women's movement occurred everywhere. So this is a openness. At the same time, there are many complexities. In terms of race, for example, minority issue, Chinese issue, actually there are a lot of improvement because now there are laws against discriminations, racial discriminations. There are already, before there was restriction from the Chinese to enter the public space. But now we see that the governor of Jakarta is a Chinese, we could never think about this before, So in terms of racial issue, of course, there are a lot of changes already, there are, but now the issue is not so much racial issue, maybe, although racism is still there. Here, of course, it cannot be erased just like that. But now, for example, religious issue after 9/11, people are started to be more sensitive about religion rather than race. So the relations between religions in in the country become much more critical, more sensitive in a way. So it's not a linear. But of course, again, compared to before, the state is not that big. I mean, before in 1998, before in the New Order government, we have a very big, powerful state. After 98, we sort of tried to question the authority of the state, to give more room for democracy. So actually now civilian activism is much stronger now. But at the same time, some people say, where is the state? When these things happen, why the state is not there? So there are always a complexity, because now, where the democracy is there everywhere, it's more horizontal contestation instead of vertical state versus society. It's society versus society. And sometimes in certain conflicts, we want the state to intervene, So this is the condition at this time, balancing the state authority, the citizens' initiative and activism, and democracy. It is all still in the making. So it's very crucial that we keep on the movement, because this is a crucial, formative kind of moment in which all the democratic elements have to be really watched. Where will they go? The parliament is a very critical place for democracy, and we still have a lot of corruption, a lot of bad politics in the parliament. So now there are so many issues on the ground. Anti-corruption, of course still anti-violence. And what about the military, what about the previous state violence? Have we managed to deal with them? Because in this kind of formative, kind of a transition kind of period, if these past issues are not dealt with, then it's bound to repeat again. So if we experience 98, we experience 65, If we are not dealing with this past now, the same thing could happen again, and it's not dealt with yet. Even in this time of openness, people are not ready to talk about the trauma of the past. 98, the victims, there are nothing has been done by the state to acknowledge that this happened. Even there's still a denial that 98 occurred, the rape against Chinese women. And what about not only the rape against Chinese women? Actually in 98 there are a lot of victims of rioting from the side of the urban poor, because the urban poor are also the victims of the 98. They were actually lured to come to the malls to actually take things from the mall in order to be burned there, So who did it? We still could not get our hands into this. What about 1965? So there are so many issues faced by activists, intellectuals, and the society. Good thing is that now there are many movements, so many different movements in the society. Some are dealing with 65, some are dealing with 98, some are dealing with women's issue, gender issue, but again, as I said, conservative and also repressive movement are also there in society that try to, for example, stop this movement. So that is the condition right now.
But then for 65, maybe we could go on two ways. One is the impact on you, because you were very young, but already old enough to sense the kind of what was happening around, and why, for example, your family did not decide to move away or to, like many other families. And then the other question is how far can people now talk about 65, including fact-finding, how many people were killed, and but then that is the statistics question, and yet there's the bigger question of this impact on the entire Indonesian society, with this very this attempt to eliminate communist ideas of vocally communist thought on society.
Okay, so let me answer the first issue that relates to me personally. Right? 65 is very important in terms of my own awareness of how my family or we are all implicated in the whole violence, you know. So at that time, the violence was not directed only against Chinese, of course. Of course, Chinese was part of it as they were associated to the communist China, right? But anybody who were accused of being communist will be killed. It's not only by the state or the military, but by everybody, you know. So people are killing each other, and sometimes the communist allegation is just a way to do violence. Sometimes if you don't like that person, you can say he is a communist, and then that's the way to get rid of that person. So the society was sort of divided, and it was so bloody, right? Of course, at that time I was still 12 years old, or 11 to 12, and I didn't actually see the killing, but there are so many, you know, references to the killing in our daily life. There were songs, you know, and then people started gossiping, or there was just folklores of finding thumbs, you know, floating thumbs, you know, there is myths of ghosts of floating thumbs. And what it means, I now realize, is the killing, and you know how people were actually tied, their thumbs were being tied in the bag. So these ghost stories that we hear when we were young in the 60s were related to that violence, you know. And then my family, of course, and the community in the city, I lived in Malang at that time, was completely affected, because the Chinese community, as I have discussed earlier in other places, a very heterogeneous community in terms of their origin. Like some are from Hakka, Hokkien, you know, Kek, and they have their own, you know, clubs or whatever. Another is the one that is culturally assimilated, like my family, very much assimilated, and the one that still retain their Chinese kind of heritage. The difference is sometimes because of the, you know, the years of migration, you know, because since my family, for example, have been migrated 7 generations, we actually were already assimilated to the culture, local culture. Others, more recent migrants, might still, but these Chinese who were still return their Chineseness, and the one that assimilated, they were also different groups. Sometimes they could not even talk to one another because of the language, and also because of racism amongst each other. So I realized later on in '98 that I was also racist, you know, at that time, because I could not tolerate those who were still very much strong in their Chineseness, because of why they are not patriotic enough, you know. So this kind of thing was sort of internalized in me at that time, since I was very small. You know, the whole ideologies of being nationalistic towards my country, Indonesia, and that war, I should erase sort of my Chineseness. That kind of thing is, you know, I don't realize it. And in the society, like among the community itself, like I live in with my family is Catholic. There's very strong Catholic activism. So my father was active in Catholic, you know, organization, etc., etc. So we were therefore very much against communist. It was in our upbringing, you know, meaning not communist as in terms of religion, no, but my father was more towards the activism with the church, whereas the family, for example, next door, they were more active in social kind of social activism, and which is closer to the Communist Party kind of thing. And the Christian are not very much supportive to the communists, because they have their own kind of ideologies kind of thing. And then especially the Catholics are very much, you know, very strong, not supportive of the Communist Party at that time, you know. And the other group of Chinese friends are not assimilationists, but they call themselves integrationist, meaning that they want to be active in politics as Chinese people, you know, Indonesian people of Chinese background. Whereas my father's camp was the assimilationists. So they want to be active in politics, but being Chinese that is already assimilated. So there is a different kind of stream of politics going on in the community at that time. Now, when 1965 occurred, suddenly there's communist cleansing, you know. Before the 1965, my father and my neighbors, they are friends. Even if they have different ideologies, you know, you're pro-communist, we are, you know, more, we have, my father was working in the different, you know, kind of activism. They play tennis together, they, their families, they married one another, you know. They're just friends. And in the culture of the 1950s, you know, you are okay. I mean, we can be different in ideologies, political ideology. You can follow different parties, but we are still friends. We argue very, you know, very strong debates. Maybe we can, you know, be very strict, strong to one another, but then they are still family. But 1965, my neighbors gone. You know, they were abducted by the whoever, we don't know, because he was closer to the Communist Party than us, you know. My father was also interrogated, because as a social, my father in the Catholic activism was very charity oriented. He gave charity to everybody, you know, including the Communist Party, or, you know, whoever, whatever section they give charity. So my father was also interrogated, because in the list, you know, you give, you know, charity to this and this organization. But he was safe because of his Catholicism, you know. Whereas my neighbor, who is maybe more secular rather than religious, although he has Confucianism or whatever, is more had a difficulty, because he is legally associated with a certain parties or activism, which is under the sort of umbrella of the Communist Party. So he was gone. My father was not. And my family was safe in that way. And then there was also a movement by the religious right wing at that time against this. They were involved in the communist cleansing. So in a way, we were implicated in this communist cleansing because we are sort of religiously affiliated at that time, right? So some youth wings of the Catholic organization, for example, helped the youth wing of the Islamic movement and was used by the military to also help to cleanse sort of a communist movement. So we are all implicated in that violence, right? Although I was still 12 years old at that time. So after the communist cleansing of the New Order government is anti-communist. And we all ingrained this, because there are movies, there are indoctrinations of the communist becomes a kind of a keyword to be very, it's like a witch hunt kind of thing. You mentioned the word communist. It's like a, disease or like. So this generation is being indoctrinated until 98, right? All this when the New Order government collapsed, and now after that we all have to reconsider our part in the story, in the history, right? Although my father never is involved in the killing, my father has been trying to help the neighbors. Actually, he went and he asked, tried to. But we were in the camp that are safe. They are in the camp that are killed, So we were sort of in the other camp that actually is in line with the New Order ideology, anti-communist ideology. So this is also a moment for us to realize. So after 98, there are many people from my generation that started to look back. Some of them are from the groups that were marginalized, that were killed or were ostracized during that time. Although they were not like directly affiliated with the Communist Party, but they were accused. Their father was sort of killed because of this and that. We are all the generation that have that history in, from our previous generation. We started to come together and then we have to do something about it. We are somehow implicated. So I started to help writing the memoir of 1965 victims, and listen to the stories and rewrite the stories as a generation that will have to deal with it and say that we don't want to repeat what is the past generation have done, So that is from a kind of a personal take. I started to be doing a lot of collective memory movement. Also, my effort in remembering my city, Malang, and the activism in that past is a way also to come to terms with it. Because after a few years ago, I come to connect again with the children of my neighbor, that felt very much. They have to go all over the place. They have to go to the Netherlands. They have to go to China and we somehow reconnect to one another, and we are in a different camp, and we started to talk to each other and how to heal these wounds, So that was it's sort of a generation kind of movement. That is my personal position, and now in society, the younger generation started to do what I did and my generation did, started to they want to look back at 1965 to see it and then acknowledge it, and how to say no to this violence. But at the same time, there is a lot of distance already with it, right? I still experience it, but the other generation might not experience it. They only heard about it. They might not have a certain closeness to it. And with distance, of course, the emotional, feeling towards it is also different, right? And then now, there are a lot of movements in the ground from all over generation, across generation, to remember again 1965. But at the same time, the generation that were implicated in that movement, in that 1965, were still alive. Like not necessarily my parents' generation, but those younger than my parents, the one that are in the military, that were also part of that communist cleansing movement at that time within the military. Some of them felt very guilty of what they did, and they started to realize, not the younger generation, for example, to realize this is not our own problem. We were not isolated in that time. The politics is not only local and national politics. There was this Cold War, We started to talk about the Cold War. And what about, America, And the foreign policy at that time of the US that also support our military. So there was also connection with the world politics. The younger generation started to learn about it too, right? But the people, the other generation that were still, with very much engulfed in the ideology, they could not let go of their position. Like we have writers from different camps at that time. And the writers at that time were also very much divided. There were a lot of debates, fights between writer of the left-wing camp and the, arts for arts camp and the art for society camp, for example. And both camps felt that if the other side win, they would be killed. That kind of feeling is still very strong among that generation. So we heard now writers of that era, saying that, oh, the communist is still alive. The communist is still, there is new communism in society, They're still saying this. And then some right-wing groups that, misunderstood the terms communism and see it in terms of religion, anti-religion started to support that kind of movement, anti-1965 memorizing movement. And you see now these authors started to say something like that, and then we heard there is an international writers festival in Bali. Some activities got cancelled. The launching of 1965, book got cancelled because people are afraid of the right-wing attack, and there is some police coming to them, saying that you should not do the 65 memorizing. And young people, artists in Jogja, are going to do arts kind of a commemoration of the 1965. They had to do it underground because they're still afraid of repression. So we are still in that moment, Some parts of society still not ready to talk about 1965. They're still within this communist phobia. Although, we know the world today, what happened after the Berlin Wall crumbled down, But for them, it's still like they are stuck in the past. And they could not let go of this communist phobia. So it's still very much alive. So we are in that moment in which people wanted to talk about it, but some segment of the society are still stuck within that phobia. Yeah.
So even now, when people talk about the left, or talk about socialism or communism, there would be a lot of problems or pressure.
Yeah, still, they said they would be accused if they don't like our movement. They would say, "Oh, you are leftist," and leftist means you are communist. That kind of term still, and we still there. And then we, for example, some of our friends want to rewrite history, because we have history in our textbooks, and the textbooks, the monuments, still very much anti-communist and very much communist phobia and leftist phobia, and then or whatever is leftist is dangerous kind of thing, politicizing women who are politicized is dangerous, and so also, they are still in the monuments of 1965, and we want to have a different monuments, right? And the different monuments can be digital monuments, it can be writers monuments, it can be arts monuments, it can be living monuments, it can be whatever monument. We don't need statues, right, to compete with the military statues that actually commemorate the 1965 as the patriotic nationalist movement against this enemy of the nation. Because at that time, both our neighbors and us, they all love our country. They want to do the best for the country through different means, One through maybe social activism in a religious way, social activism in a leftist way, So, but even to create an alternative monuments, we still have problem. So we will still do the collective memory kind of project, but not in a centralized, very high profile way, but a dispersed kind of way. That is the way to go, I think. Students, watching some movie and discuss, artists do some discussion and do installation project in different way. And we want to get new framework of looking at 1965, not divided into this old politics, but new alternative way, new vocabularies of looking at the 1965. So we will not be sort of jailed or frozen by this old kind of dichotomy of left and right, because we are beyond left and right now. There is a new left which is beyond this old division, and this is obsolete already, but people still are held back. Some people are still held back by the past.
Yes. Because we also heard about the current government's policy package, and we heard we had the chairman of the president's advisory group, the lady who came to give a speech about the new economics, and so there are elements of saying that they would like to do more, to give more subsidies for education, health, etc. But at the same time, they also stress the idea of having Indonesia being competitive and attracting investments for infrastructure, and of course there are these contradictions. So even if the current government is more progressive in some ways, in the larger context, all the contradictions of neoliberalism would be having its adverse impacts on especially the subaltern classes, the disadvantaged. So from the internal contradictions, of course there would be movements for example, landless farmers, landless peasants,
sure.
They still want to want land, and there would be other the urban poor questions. And so when all these movements start to evolve and they become critical of the current status quo, then they could still be easily named as leftist or communist.
That's right.
And so this would be a kind of a constraint for them to articulate their demands.
That's right. There are a lot of contradictions in the new government. It's very, it gives us a lot of hope of change and reform. It's very youthful in terms of its promise and progressive. But at the same time, like you say, it's filled with a lot of contradiction, number one. Number two, also, the machinery is still very much the old machinery. I mean, the government machinery, and the parliament is still very much, a lot of the legacy of the past is still very much there. So we can't avoid this contradiction in the government. So we need to push from different directions to save this from getting back to the old, states, or even regressive to the worst condition. That's the position right now. So I think for us now is to find, like I said, new ways of framing our movement, and new ways of new terms. We still to find this, whatever we find it, and also trying to collaborate with different elements in society, in various ways, because of course there are the extreme right wing, extreme kind of neoliberal force, and right wing at the same time, the other one, but there are segments of society in the middle, within this, between this. Of course, we cannot we cannot deal with the extreme right wing, because they would not even listen, or there is no possibility, for example. But we still can do a lot of things with those in the middle. Even the neoliberal kind of capitals in a way could be tapped into something else, So it should not be antagonistic in a way, but how to find to change society by collaborating and moving in many different ways. I think it calls for new strategies, more complicated. We can collaborate with the right wings, definitely, in many ways, but the middle right wing, in terms of empowering the farmers, for example, and making some, some changes or awareness against, and for example, ecology. We can talk about ecology as a way of not being termed this and that, but the ecology is the limit, we see it today, the fire, the smoke. It is, I think, everybody is affected. The whole country is affected. The economy is affected. This is the limit, and we can talk from that side instead of left, right, or whatever it is. Ecology, and what can we do? Even the companies, whatever capitals, they cannot do anything with this. And they have to change, and there are pressure from the society, from the people, to say no. What kind of investment, and how will it affect the environment? How it will affect the people living in the environment? What about the farmer, agriculture? Now, I think it's the moment. This crisis, environmental crisis, for example. Yeah.
Yes.